Thank you. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:05 p.m. We'll take a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon?
Present.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Mr. Escobedo?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
I want to thank Alan, who's running the show tonight, for the Channel 20 viewing of all our thousands and thousands of community members who watch our tens of thousands. Okay. All right. So, yeah, tens of people.
Oh, I meant tens, yeah.
Okay. So we're at the petitions and communication portion of our meeting when we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we're following those mandates during this petitions and communication portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meetings in an efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. We have the clock on the wall to help you with your timing, and we thank you for your interest and cooperation with our guidelines. So our first speaker tonight is Denise Pearson, to be followed by Reverend Derek Shelby. Denise?
I want to first just thank Anthony Dixon for bringing a forum to All Nations Church with Dr. Jared, who shared a lot of information on the progress of District 205. It was a big help. Also, the strategic update. I know that you all have a thankless job, and every now and then I want to just say thank you for keeping us up on the progression of our district and to encourage the public to respond in parental engagement and to be present. No doubt our district have some opportunities, but there's a lot of positive things going on, and we don't want to overshadow that with the negativity. Also, I had an opportunity to take a tour of Barber School, and they are doing a phenomenal job, and it is a great need for expansion there, and they are making a huge sacrifice to make the climate conducive for learning, and both meeting the needs of the students academically as well as socially. So thank you so much for all of your hard work. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Denise. Reverend Shelby.
Revelation chapter 2, verse 13. I know, Jesus said, I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. Jesus said, I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. Segregation is race, y'all. Segregation is race. Segregation is race. Rockford, Illinois is a wicked city. I think about the money they've taken out the west side of Rockford the last 50 years. Tax money. Now, this is not paper money. It's not monopoly. They've taken out $1 billion. I did the numbers. I figured about $20 million a year for 50 years. They've taken $1 billion out of the west side of Rockford. and not put a penny back. Now they resegregated the schools, went through the system, and the federal government said it was wrong. There's only one reason you segregate schools. That's to destroy a certain amount of people. It's the only reason. Any other reason is a lie. You're lying to yourself. And it's done with intent. This is done with intent. And the Lord knows, but He knows everything every human being does or thinks on this planet. He knows what you're going to be doing from a year from now. He understands how Satan works, how the devil works. He's defeated both of them, but he's still letting them roam down here just for a time. And some human beings allow Satan to rule, to influence their evil thinking. And segregation is evil, y'all. They should read the whole thing about public school. The things is wrong.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'll ask now if there's any board member comments. Mr. Rollins.
Just want to congratulate a couple of our schools. There's a website that ranks schools nationally, and if you go to, it's called schooldigger.com, www.schooldigger.com. If you go to that website and go to Illinois and go to middle schools, the top-ranked middle school in the state of Illinois is Thurgood Marshall Middle School, out of 1,304 middle schools in the state of Illinois. If you go to elementary schools, the 8th-ranked elementary school is the still named Washington Academy.
Okay.
It's out of 2,063 elementary schools in the state of Illinois. So we have here in Rockford the top-ranked in the state of Illinois middle school and the 8th-ranked elementary school. And we have a lot of challenges. We shouldn't ignore those challenges. But when we have successes, I also think we should celebrate those successes. So I want to congratulate the staff, the teaching staff in those buildings, the administrators, the other staff, and the children and the parents all. And I think we should get that word out.
Okay. Thank you. Any other board member comments? If not, then we'll move on to the consent portion of our agenda, including the following items: payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, construction bid request log, contracts under $10,000 and travel, the recurring contracts for RCM Healthcare Services, Title I funded lease for Chromebooks, the school social worker was pulled by administration. The other consent items include the monthly investment report through October of 2017, the financial results through October of 2017, and the Freedom of Information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Dixon. Are there any items that board members would like to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the consent items.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're now at the closed session consent agenda items, including the following: the HR organizational report and addendum, closed session student discipline, unless otherwise modified below. The board adopts and accepts the hearing officer's findings and recommendations of the following cases in which students expelled or suspended are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. Student 4124 is expelled for the remainder of the first semester of this school year. Student 4121 and student 4126 are expelled for the remainder of this school year. Student 4119 and 4125 are expelled for the remainder of this school year and the first semester of next school year. Student 4118 is expelled for the remainder of this school year and the entire 2018-19 school year. The expulsion for student 2022 is held in abeyance contingent upon the expulsion and abeyance agreement for the remainder of this school year through the first trimester of next school year. And the expulsion for student 4122 and student 4123 are also held in abeyance contingent upon expulsion and abeyance agreement for the remainder of this school year through the first semester of next school year. And the following EIAs were approved: 3376, 3377, 3378, 3379, 3380, 3381, 3382, 3383, 3385, 3386, 3388, 3389, 3390, and 3391. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the closed session consent items.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're now on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
Thank you, Mr. Scrivano. As a preview for one of our introductory items, we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite subject, which is setting the levy. A lot of our taxing bodies in the region have been doing that, and just wanted to use my comments tonight to provide a little bit of background information on that. Setting the levy is a very, very hot topic in our region and our community because obviously local taxpayers and businesses are often very frustrated with the cumulative tax rate. I do want to take this time for those that are listening and here in the audience to just give a little background on what our proposed strategy is going to be this year on the levy and why we've set that strategy. Worked very closely with Board Member Rollins, who is the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, and our CFO, Mrs. Nicole Thorne, who's not here this evening. And so I am going to just give a little bit of background on this. First of all, a levy really ends up being the dollars that we are collecting from the local taxpayer, and we have the ability, if we are not capped out, to collect additional dollars, but that is limited by what our total rate is, but it's also limited by whatever the increase in the consumer price index is. Our district has taken a very different approach because one of the things that determines what you can levy is what your property is worth. We call that EAV, or Equalized Assessed Value. And in about over a 10-year period, our equalized assessed value was approaching, at the height of the property boom in this country, around 2008, it was just under $3 billion. As recently as the last fiscal year in 2016, it had dropped under $2 billion. So we had lost about 33% of the value, on paper at least, of our community. And as a result, our tax rate has gone up. So many people in the community may have drawn the conclusion, gosh, why are they raising my taxes as a school district? What we've actually done is something very different. What we've done as a school district, and this board I think should be very proud, as well as some previous boards, of what I think has been a very fiscally responsible strategy. And I want to just tell that story a little bit as some background as we start talking about the levy today. In 2011, that was the first year I had the opportunity to serve as an assistant superintendent, and many of the board members that are here today were involved in this. Our levy, we collected about $170 million. And it was the end of a 5-year commitment the community had made through a proposal called Kids Win. And we passed a facilities referendum, and that board at that time promised that they would also then lower that by $13 million. So in our 2012 levy year, instead of collecting $170 million from the local taxpayer, we collected $157 million. What I'm even more proud of is that the board has continually, as board members have changed out, some of whom have been here the whole time. 2012, we collected $157 million, 2013, $155, 2014, $157, 2015, $156, 2016, $154, and this year we are proposing again, this will be the 6th consecutive year that we've either lowered or kept the levy flat. So while oftentimes people in the community look at the tax rate, that doesn't really tell the whole story. What this board has really been deeply committed to has really prevented what could have been a much, much worse situation from local taxes. The good news is property values have started modestly increasing over the last 2 cycles. And so our rate peaked at $7.93, which is a very high number. However, just to give you some perspective on where that sits, we rank 4th out of 9 regional school districts. And we are the lowest percentage of all 9 regional school districts, at least as of 2016, of the percentage of the tax bill. So when you look at your Rockford, if you live in the city of Rockford and you pay your property tax bill, we're about 51% of your bill. If you're in another community in this region, it's likely that your school district is anywhere between 70 or 80% of your property tax bill. So that's something I think we're really proud of. The other thing I wanted to point out is from the 2015 levy to this 2016 levy, the rate actually started to drop because the board continued to keep those revenues flat. So we dropped from $7.93 to $7.80 last year. And the punchline, the big recommendation this year is we are going to be recommending a $7.72 hopeful rate by collecting the flat levy again at $154.5 million. So again, to summarize, it was a $13 million drop from 11 to 12, from 170 to 157 million, and from 12, 13, 14, 2015, 2016, and now proposed for 2017, we have had a levy that has held very steady between 154.5 and 157 million. So this board has shown very strong fiscal responsibility. Now there are trade-offs that come with that, so we're going to have to be very, very astute in how we build our budget because our costs have not remained flat during that period of time. Those of you that are paying attention know that our health care costs go up at least 4 to 5%. One of the reasons we've been able to sustain this is we have had some years with better than expected results on health care cost increases, but overall labor costs increase, health care costs increase. There are a lot of costs that go up. So I think it's a real credit to the leadership of this board that we've maintained that. Our administration, again, for the 6th year in a row, is going to be recommending a flat or slightly decreased levy, and we believe that is a way we can do our part. Some other ways that we've done our part is, in addition to that 21-cent rate reduction and keeping it flat for the entire 6 years, we've also been part of a 2-year partnership that Mr. Rollins and now our current Mayor McNamara dreamt up in their backyard, talking over the fence line to do a 3-year tax rebate. And so we've, in addition to holding the levy flat, been making some investments to try to stimulate blighted properties coming off the market on the residential level and spurring some new construction. So that has been a multi-$100,000 investment. So I think there are a lot of things that go into this number. And so it would be easy to say, hey, we're going to keep the levy flat again. But I really felt like I wanted to take the time tonight to thank the board, the administration, and all the people that have put a lot of hard work into making sure we can make that happen. And I'm excited to make that recommendation. I believe that's what's right for our community. And we expect and encourage all of the other taxing bodies to follow suit, to find ways to do more with less, because we feel like the tax rate needs to go down, and the only way that that rate is going to go down is if all of our taxing bodies continue to collect the same or less dollars as we take time for the property values to go up. So thank you for indulging me on a long economic lecture, but I really, really think this bears repeating. It's important work, and it's something that we think is really going to help the community.
Mr. Rollins, I'll just ask if you have any other comments that you'd like to make on that subject.
I guess the only thing, well, first off, I do want to, although I feel like, we're talking to ourselves, unfortunately. So the first thing I'll say is we do get, I think, criticized by some people for worrying too much about taxes. And for me, it's not because I'm trying to save taxpayers' money, which is a good thing. It is a good thing to save taxpayers' money. I actually do think it's in the district's best long-term interest. We are, unfortunately, even though we're the largest taxing body in Rockford, we're not the only taxing body in Rockford. There are something like 11 different taxing districts if you live in Rockford, which I do. If you ever want to look at your tax bill, go ahead and do it. And our aggregate tax rate in Rockford is significantly higher than all of our surrounding communities. And the vast majority of our tax revenue comes from residential real estate. People have choices, and when they buy a house, when they are moving into the area, if they're deciding to move out of the area, and the larger the discrepancy is, the difference is between our tax rate and the tax rate of surrounding communities, the more likelihood that people are going to choose not to live in Rockford. And in the long term, that is going to be very, very bad for this school district. And so I'm proud of the administration and the board and the leadership they provided in sort of providing the leadership to hold the levy steady. We have not, as Dr. Jarrett said, not only held the levy steady, we're actually significantly lower levy than when I got on the board in 2011. And, it's unfortunate. I was, really disappointed the first year when we lowered our levy significantly and the rate still went up. I think we're finally starting to turn a corner. I think if we continue to provide this leadership, we will start seeing reductions in the overall rate. And I think our real goal needs to be collectively, as a community, and not just this taxing body, but all taxing bodies in Rockford, our collective goal needs to be to close that delta, to close that difference between our tax rate and the tax rate in surrounding communities, because we need people to choose Rockford. We need people to choose to live in Rockford and to pay taxes in Rockford. And that's really what this is all about.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to committee reports. Mrs. McCulloch, the Education Committee.
So the Education Committee met in this room last Tuesday, November 21st. There were 2 items on the agenda. One was a comprehensive overview of what we're doing with the multi-classroom leaders, which, Ms. Detman, correct me if I get anything off path here, but basically it was a collaborative effort with the REA to try to do an innovative approach to, especially in our lowest performing schools, what could we do to up the achievement? And so a group went down to Nashville, saw this multi-classroom leader approach. We invited 5 schools, and 2 of which were chosen to pilot the program. The 2 schools chosen were Kishwaukee and Washington. Both schools have a 5th grade involved, but Kishwaukee does kindergarten and Washington is doing 2nd grade. And so basically what it's doing is we've invited a student teacher to be with that grade level for the entire year instead of just for one semester. In addition to the student teacher, one of the teachers, depending on the number of strands, 2 or 3, one of those teachers is identified as a multi-classroom leader. They're paid a little bit of an additional stipend. And they are the leader that kind of coordinates and the collaboration between the other teachers in that level. It's very helpful because you have an additional adult body helping to teach. The multi-classroom leader does do some teaching. They do interface with students, but they also spend time organizing the team so that they can review student progress, change instructional strategies, organize and plan instructional teaching. And one of the things that happens is to do all this planning and this integration and collaboration is they need additional meeting time. And so the teachers on those teams voluntarily are coming in for additional meetings to do that. The one school is coming in like at 7 in the morning, 6:45. Because they have so many things to discuss, plus they don't want to take time away from student instruction. So the schedules, we were given a copy of what the schedules are, and we were also given an outline of what they plan to do, and it was a collaborative even approach there where the information from both schools was put together, and that is on board docs under Education Committee from November 21st if anybody wants to see. One of the additional meetings besides collaborating within their school is once a month they meet with the team from the other schools. So they do and they alternate which school they attend. So, it is a pilot program. It ends at the end of this year. The metrics, they don't have to show us. One of the things we're hoping is to have a pipeline of qualified teachers who are student teachers who want to come teach for us. We pay a small stipend to those student teachers. It's $15,000 for the entire year. Those student teachers are from Rockford College and Northern Illinois, who are on opposite schedules for their student teaching. So the gentleman who was here from Northern Illinois is still taking classes this semester while he's teaching here in the district. He spends the entire day with our students, and then he still takes, I think he said he was taking 15 hours. It was like a full schedule. But next semester, he's solely student teaching. The gal from Rockford College is just the opposite. She is solely committed to the classroom, no additional classes, and then she'll have to take her other classes along with teaching the second semester. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the process for the two of them. And I think it was very purposeful that we wanted to see how that impacted. The students, there's co-teaching going on, so there's additional time with interface with students in a classroom when you have additional adults. But the metrics to show whether or not this is working, we don't have comparative numbers. We did the first set of MAP tests, and they'll look again in this January, I think, and we'll make some. They were very excited. I'm really excited to see some teachers who were just so engaged with their students, engaged with each other, willing to put in extra time, and just because they wanted to move the needle with the students and work, they really felt like this was a positive model. So we'll look forward to the update on that. The other presentation was on some new course updates, and this is at the high school level, science, math, and social studies. The curriculum department worked with curriculum leadership teams and looked at state standards and instructional practices and had conversations. Then they presented their findings and their recommendations first to the teachers, is what we were informed, and then they went to the building administration, and then they went to instructional council. So they really worked, so often we see things go from a high level down. We'll go to the principals, or we'll have all the conversations as a curriculum leadership, or as the deans, or the downtown, what do we call them? Are they administrators? Okay. And then we'll tell other people, but it really sounds like they drew in the teachers early on in this process. So, it makes total sense what they brought forward. When we talked about the science, for example, we have all our students pretty much take biology that first year, but then they kind of diverge, and it's like, should I take chemistry or should I take earth science? And so a lot of if you want to go the little bit easier route, and they gave us the numbers. So for example, in 10th grade, the enrollment in earth science and environmental science was 712, and chemistry was 592. And then in 11th grade, your junior year, earth science 469, and chemistry went down to 119. We also saw some increase in the engagement with the AP courses. But the idea is, this was my thing, and I said, when you take your, we're doing SATs now, and we were doing ACTs, but they don't ask you when you step up, do you want the test with the hard science or do you want the test with the soft science? Everybody takes the same one. And so what they're looking at doing is doing an integrated approach, both in science and math. And so what that will mean is the new sequence would be, they would continue with the majority of students would take biology that first year, but if they can take chemistry, straight on chemistry in 10th grade, or they can take an integrated science, which will include chemistry with earth science, and some of the other standards. And then in 11th grade, the same thing will happen. In that year, they would take physics, if you've already taken chemistry, and then the integrated science would continue. It would be a second year of that. And we have 3 years for our students of science. So, and some might miss a year and take that senior year also, correct? And some students might just take a 4th year of science. Questions were asked about how that's being worked or incorporated with academies. It sounds like that work is still underway, determining curriculum and how they'll pull in different areas of studies, whether it's the engineering versus the health area. So in the current sequence on math, what we look at is algebra, then geometry, and then algebra 2. that's at a general population. If you started algebra in 8th grade, you might take honors geometry in 9th grade, then college algebra, pre-calculus, and then stats or calculus. And what's being looked at is taking Math 1 in 9th grade, Math 2 in 10th grade, and Math 3 in 11th grade. And again, it's an integrative approach so that algebra isn't set aside all on its own, that we're looking at algebra and geometry together and some of the other hard math. Same thing on the end of social sciences. Instead of separating out world geography, world history, honors world history, AP human geography, they're going to do a freshman singularity, they called it, which was included global studies. So it's going to put together the world geography and the world history together, along with the human geography and world history. I get that right, too? It's a little bit different because of the 2 AP pieces. Yeah, so those other 2 are actually offered as AP. But the whole idea is a more global approach, and that students won't be taking, there won't be a singularity of classes offered, and that you don't just get algebra 1 year or 1 and 2 years, you get it throughout your whole sequence. So both the process to get here and what they're trying to do, the teachers, the curriculum leadership, everybody was pretty excited about it, and time will tell, I guess. And this will go into effect for the next year, so it'll be in the up and coming catalog, and obviously starting with 9th graders. If you're already a 9th grader and going into 10th grade, we won't have that in place yet. Questions?
I have one, and maybe this is a Mr. Zediker question, because I did watch, but there were some problems with the sound, so I'm mostly interested in the feedback from the student teachers from the perspective of it was a positive experience, they want to come work here, they don't want to work anywhere else, and we want them.
Yep.
Is that kind of what you heard?
Yeah, out of the
Okay.
4 aspiring teachers, every single one of them said they actually weren't going to consider Rockford as a student teaching placement, and this opportunity presented itself, and all 4, at the time they were interviewed, had said that they want to work for our district.
Okay, cool. Anybody else? Mr. Rollins?
I just have kind of a general question. So I understand there's a movement that I think started on the East Coast that high schools in the U.S. teach the science curriculum backwards. That currently we teach biology, chemistry, physics, and that we should teach physics and then chemistry and biology. And I'm just curious as to, since you seem to be looking at the structure of the science curriculum, whether that's come up.
It has, and that's mostly come out of New Jersey. There's a teacher of the year named Bob Goodman, and as part of his kind of year of being teacher of the year, the following year, he was given this position at the state level, and really his focus was in algebra-based physics as the first science course that students take. And there's a lot of sound reasoning behind that. There's also an incredible challenge and barrier as it comes to teacher credentialing. Now, what's unique about New Jersey is that the union and the state work together to create new rules and new opportunities for physics endorsements and credentialing so that any science teacher can become credentialed to be a physics teacher rather easily. And they work together to create that program of study, and they have some pretty rigorous professional development. We do not have that opportunity in the state of Illinois, and so while that's something that would be a good future aspiration, there were too many barriers for us to implement that here. Additionally, when we look at the next generation science standards, by integrating our science, we're really pulling physics concepts into all of our courses so that it's not exclusive only to one course. So our students will be getting those physics concepts in all 3 years of science.
Any other questions? All right, is that it for Ed Committee report?
Oh, yeah, we'll
okay.
meet again I put aside my No, we're here in December. Yeah, January, that'd be nice,
Yeah,
but
okay.
no. December 19th at 5:30, we'll be in this room again for our last meeting of the year.
Okay, Mr. Rollins, the Finance Committee report.
Finance Committee has not met, but we will be meeting on December 4th in this room at 5:30 PM, and we will be talking about the levy.
Mr. Connor, Operations.
Operations has not met. We'll meet on Tuesday, December the 5th at 6:30. Included on our schedule will be follow up on on Aramark and the current numbers on that. And we have a number of other items, and we usually have an update on facilities, so that'll be on the docket.
You want to mention your meetings about the naming
No.
committee?
Yes, I
Okay,
would.
okay,
Thank you for reminding me. Hello.
Okay.
Tomorrow night at Flynn Middle School at 6:30, there is a community meeting on the naming of the new school that's located out in Cherry Valley. There have been 2 petitions to date that have been submitted with names for that. Then on the following night, on Thursday, there'll be another community meeting, this time in this room at 6:30 on Thursday, and that will be regarding the new school that's being built where the current Kishwaukee School is. And I believe there's already 2 petitions that have been turned in, and I think there's a third, right? 3. Yeah, 3 for the Kishwaukee Nelson Replacement School located at Kishwaukee. So we'll be, at both of these, we'll have a facilitated session where there will be essentially 2-minute time limit to address people's feedback on the names. And so those two will be there. And then the results of that, thank you very much for reminding me, will be discussed at the next Operations Committee meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Connor? Okay. All right, we're now on to our action items. The first action item is the Barber School facility adjustments. Mr. Schmidt and Dr. Salzis presented this at our last board meeting. Is there a motion and a second to approve the Barber School facility adjustments?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of action item 14A for Barber School facility adjustments.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next item is the professional service contract with Angela Scordato for arts grant that was presented. Is there a motion and a second to approve this agreement?
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on action item 14B, professional service contract with Angela Scordato for arts grants.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Next action item is the contract for professional development services for arts grant with Jay Bertles Bath the Trash that was presented at our last meeting. Is there a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Connor?
Love the name.
Okay, are you, okay, okay. All right, any others? If not, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of action item 14C, contract for professional development services for arts grant.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next item is the contract for teaching services with James Crow for AEMMDD and PDAE grants. Is there a motion and a second to approve this contract?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor. Is there a
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 14D, contract for teaching services with James Crow.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next item is the resolution for authorization of eminent domain for 524 Union Street that Mr. Schmidt presented. Is there a motion and a second to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Connor?
Is Mr. Schmidt still here?
Yes.
Could you at least give us a 2-sentence overview on why this is going to eminent domain?
This building, we actually have a contract with them. The board approved this one. We just have some legal issues that we have to clear up, and it was the recommendation from our outside legal counsel to follow up through with eminent domain.
Ms. McCullough? No? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 14E, the resolution for authorization of the eminent domain at 524 Union Street.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next is the mechanical and electrical services for West Middle School that Mr. Bailing presented at our last meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Connor?
Yeah, I think it'd be worth repeating at least some of the overview on this because some of the potential costs are pretty high. Staggering would be a right
Extreme.
right term. So if Mr. Bailing or Mr. Schmidt could come up and at least address what's going on and the potential costs. And the one question I've got is I don't know exactly the funding on this one, so to be clear on that also.
Thank you.
I'll address the scope of work is to investigate at a little more detailed level where we have problems in the domestic water distribution system at West and to design replacements for those so we can avoid having additional floods in parts of the building. Worst offenders are above the second floor in the central part of the building and where the office and library is located. And Mr. Schmidt can adjust fund.
Yeah, can I ask,
Yes, go ahead.
is the flooding the only real risk? What are some of the other risks that we run if conceptually we did nothing?
Just be just that. So.
The flooding would be the main one?
Disruption of the classroom environment during the school year.
Okay.
With the funding source on this, we're looking at just for the A&E fees right now. We are not identifying the funding source to actually replace all the pipes out there right now. We do have this in our life safety fund that will take the A&E fees out of right now, current life safety, Fund 92.
So would that affect the deferred maintenance
Right now,
list?
with the A&E, the A&E fees that we currently are going to have for them to design will not affect our deferred maintenance. Once we get the design and we look at, the first blush was to look at the cost. We're up at 2.7. So
Right.
we're going to get them in there to design it. Once we come up there and see what they can design, then that money will have to come back and say, this is going to have to be taken out of life safety or anything remaining out of one of our life safety bonds. And then that potentially could impact the schedule that we have in place right now for our deferred maintenance.
Okay. I assume that for the Finance Committee, that once this work is done and the plan's in place, again, given the superintendent's comments and Mr. Allen's comments, that there'd have to be a lot of planning around something that's has this much fiscal impact, which looks to be almost 4 million more than I thought. So I think, the other part, and I'll say what I said at operations, is that the question was asked, is it worth it to fix West? And the answer I gave was simple, is that we've committed to West as a facility in the current 10-year plan. So I think unless that commitment were to change, obviously, we need that facility. And then the question is, what do we do? And that's when the options will come about.
With the million that you're talking about, the 2.7 is something that we have not identified funding, but the other $1 million for the HVAC is actually currently on our deferred maintenance schedule that we're looking at combining these right now, because we already have planned to do the HVAC work. So if we have an engineer already out there and an architect, why not have them look at the plumbing fixtures while they're out there surveying the building for something that we already have identified funding source for.
Other questions and comments? Mr. Rollins.
I guess my only other comment is we've been talking as a board and with the administration for a number of years about building a schedule for every single building in the district, and Mr. Schmidt has been working on that, of when we need to do, what we need to do in order to stay ahead of the maintenance curve. And things like this happen because the district for decades didn't do that. And I do mean decades. So that's catching up with us. And so, hopefully, as we build that schedule that we've been talking about, we'll be able to see what those needs are. We'll be able to build it into our budgeting. And, my hope would be that boards in the future won't have these same issues.
Ms. McCullough.
With reference to those schedules that you're putting together, and I know that you have a schedule of all the schedules you're bringing, but then to put them, integrate them into one single schedule to look at what the cost projections are each year on the maintenance that needs to be done in the buildings, when will you get to that composite?
The composite, I think we have some major components left. We left the hardest ones for last. One of them is actually plumbing. Now that we have this issue with West, we're relooking at all the piping and the plumbing out there. We have the electrical and the HVAC and maybe one other one. So those are the biggest ones that we're still, it takes a little bit more time to do that. So hopefully by the first quarter of next year, in January, February timeframe, to have those other three components finalized right now. Along with, I think, the other 9 or 10 that we've already done, so we can have a comprehensive plan, life cycle plan on there.
So we should see that
Oh,
by
and
next.
paving and sidewalk is the other one that we're surveying everything right now.
And then after that's brought forward, the whole funding piece of that will be looked at as part of a facilities plan, or is it going to be looked at as
That'll be looked
separate?
at as we start building our next facilities plan. And then anything that we could potentially budget for each fiscal year.
Because we don't even start the next one for a couple of years to build it. So I'm just wondering, to do all that work and then to have this lapse.
We're going to keep it updated because some of those things that we've already identified that we really didn't think about that have come up, and we're going to have to readjust some of the schedules out there. If you look at it, by the time 2020 comes, we'll be 7 years into our capital plan, and we'll have over 95% of it completed by then. So we'll be on the only thing that we'll have left is interior finishes and painting and flooring and things like that. So we'll be ready to start building the next plan. And hopefully at the end of this plan, we'll have some money left over that we could contribute to the life cycle plan.
Thank you. Okay, I'll have the
Ken,
coordinator.
quick
Yes,
question.
okay, Mr.
One more.
Escobedo.
Yeah. So, root cause. What happened here? I mean, it said, typically when you have a failure like this, right, it's the materials, it's a design. When you're going to spend this much money and effort, it seems that we got to know the root cause so that we learn for future.
It's more than likely dielectric action between different metals in the plumbing system, and just like a ship has a large zinc anode on it to protect the iron. It's the same type of concept here where you've got copper connected to steel, connected to solder that has silver in it, so you have all different metals, and it's 75-plus-year-old building, and it's just it's kind of like, unfortunately, wear and tear. And going forward, in newer construction, we use dielectric fittings whenever we change between one type of metal and another in a piping system. And there's things that are done with grounding the system and things where you don't ground things to pipes that maybe have been done in the past as part of past practice, whether good practice or not. But so it's unfortunately, the older buildings are probably at the age where whatever damage has been done, and hopefully in the process of doing this project, we'll come up with some good strategies of how to identify weak points in the system and address them before they create problems.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question is, do we expect anything like this in any other existing buildings in the future?
I
know you don't have a crystal ball, but at the same time, if, based on what you've seen and what the root cause is and what similar structures we have in other
Yeah, I guess to maybe follow up on one of the questions that Mr. Rollins asked, probably it would be wise, still given the composite age of our buildings in the district, to have some money set aside for unforeseen things as you go forward in your maintenance plan, because there's obviously a lot of things concealed behind walls, above ceilings that are hard plaster ceilings, but it's really not practical to inspect them. And when you have, what do we have, close to 4 million square feet, Todd, or is it 4.8, almost 5 million square feet of space? And even with with the 2 new schools and all our additions, we still have a fairly mature building fleet, I guess is what I would say.
Will the study that we're approving contribute at all to helping to find a root cause, or it's just strictly replacement?
Be mainly replacement. I mean, it's as things get demolished, maybe we can look inside the pipes, so to speak, to try to get an idea, but it's.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, we talked about that, so this is a good question. We did talk a little bit about it at ops. The one thing I'll say on the root cause analysis is, clearly as you have design architects go in there, it's likely they may either see something, because we truly don't know. One of the things we talked about is the building layout is very similar at East, but they haven't had this problem, so one of the things we talked about is either the materials, the execution, or something was different because it was done by different companies. So there's probably something more in that than an inherent design, I would think, but we don't know. That's why I say when they go in there, they're likely to find it. The other thing is Lincoln is older, and again, as far as I know, I don't believe we've had similar problems with the piping to date. So I think that's why I would say that root cause analysis, at least we have a chance at it once they get in there and we start digging around.
Probably a larger preponderance of galvanized steel piping in this building, and that's something we don't use too much on domestic water anymore, and it's problematic.
So so it's not common practice now to ground electrical items through pipes anymore? Is that a correct statement or not? Yeah.
I would generally say yes.
Okay.
And an older building like this may have had, as electrical upgrades were done over the years, there may have been things that were using the electrical system as a ground. So
Okay.
that's speculation, though. We haven't actually found that.
All right, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 14F, which is the mechanical and electrical services study for West Middle School.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Conner.
Second.
Second by Mr.
We already
Siegel.
had a motion.
We did, all right. All right, so now, let's call the roll
I thought we
then.
were calling the roll.
Yeah, me too.
It was so long ago, I forgot.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
A new business item is the resolution to approve the 2017 tax levy. I think, Dr. Jarrett, you're going to take this?
I am.
Okay.
I gave most of the background in the overview. I would invite everyone to pack the house for the discussion for Budget and Finance Committee coming up next week. Mr. Rollins is going to host a hearty discussion about that. We'll look at other scenarios, but again, I think the administration and the board are pretty strongly behind the strategy that keeps the levy flat at $154,555,313 is the scenario, which would lower the tax rate from $7.80 to $7.72. So that's, again, about a 21-cent difference from the 2015 extension, where the rate was about $7.93. So we are heading in the right direction as property values go up. We do encourage public participation in this process. We will also start setting the stage for what will be a very challenging budget process. We did receive additional state revenue, but we also lost revenue on the corporate personal property replacement tax, and we will be capturing about $2 million less than what we would be entitled to with the CPI increase. We're foregoing that for the good of that gap that Mr. Rollins talked about. We believe in that. So there's going to be a lot of hard work to do in the budgeting process, and so if you have a good time at the next the levy discussion, you can come back for a month-by-month breakdown as we talk about the whole of the budget in January, start breaking down in February, March, and April some of the key parts of the budget, and by May, we'll have a recommendation in place, and then the board as a whole will get to interact with it as well. So there's going to be a lot of involvement in the budget process this year, a lot of opportunity to get involved for the committee. So we're looking forward to that work as a cabinet, as a leadership team, and certainly working with the board and the community on that work. But 772 is the estimated rate. $154,555,000 is the flat levy that we are recommending at this time. No action will be required. We're going to do a much deeper dive, obviously, at committee, and then bring it back in December.
Okay. Any other further discussion on that item?
I just have one.
Okay.
Will Mr. Rollins' committee have coffee supplied?
Well,
just asking.
We might need chocolate too.
Yeah,
Okay.
whatever works, but yeah, at least coffee.
All right. If there are no further comments or agenda, I'll take a motion for adjournment. Moved by Mr.
Second.
Connor, second by Mr. Siegel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 8:02.